The sun was setting behind the red rocks of Arizona Territory when Tom McCarty first laid eyes on the Apache woman. She stood at the edge of his small ranch, watching him mend a broken fence post. Her dark hair hung in 2 long braids, and she wore a simple buckskin dress that had seen many seasons. What struck Tom most was not her beauty, though she was beautiful, but the sadness in her deep brown eyes. Tom had been alone on his ranch for 3 years now. His wife Sarah had died of fever, and their 2 young children had been taken by the same sickness within days of each other. The grief had nearly broken him, but the work kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far into dark places. He was a tall man with calloused hands and a beard that had grown wild since Sarah's passing. Most folks in the nearby town of Cedar Ridge thought he had gone a little strange, living out there by himself, with only his cattle and horses for company. The Apache woman did not speak that first day. She simply watched him work until the last light faded from the sky, then disappeared into the desert like a shadow. Tom stood there for a long time after she was gone, wondering if he had imagined her. Life on the frontier could play tricks on a man's mind, especially when loneliness ate at him like a constant hunger. But she came back the next evening, and the evening after that, always at sunset, always silent, always watching from the same spot near the old cottonwood tree that marked the edge of his property. Tom began to look forward to her visits, though he could not say why. There was something peaceful about her presence, something that made the ranch feel less empty. After a week of these silent meetings, Tom decided to approach her. He set down his tools and walked slowly across the dusty yard, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The woman did not run, but she tensed like a deer ready to bolt. When he was still 20 feet away, he stopped and held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Evening," he said simply. His voice was rough from lack of use. "I'm Tom McCarty. This is my ranch." The woman studied his face for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her English was careful but clear. "I know who you are, Tom McCarty. The people in the town speak of the man who lives alone with his sorrow." Her words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "And who are you?" he asked. "I am called Ayana," she said. "It means eternal blossom in my language. Why do you come here, Ayana?" She looked past him at the ranch house, where lamplight flickered in the windows. "Because you understand loss. I can see it in the way you move, the way you hold your shoulders. It is the same way I have moved since my family was taken from me." Tom felt something shift in his chest, like a door that had been locked tight was slowly creaking open. How long ago? 2 winters passed. "The soldiers came to our camp while the men were hunting. They said we were on land that did not belong to us, though my people had lived there since the time of the grandfathers. There was shooting. My husband and my 2 sons," she paused, her voice growing thick, "they did not survive." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. 2 people who had lost everything, standing in the gathering darkness of the desert, recognizing something of themselves in each other. "You're welcome to come closer to the house," Tom said. "I could make coffee." Ayana shook her head. "Not yet. The people in your town would not understand. There is much anger between our peoples." She was right, of course. The Apache Wars had been raging for decades, with violence and mistrust on both sides. A white rancher befriending an Apache woman would raise eyebrows at best and at worst could bring serious trouble to both of them. "Then I'll bring the coffee out here," Tom said. And so began an unlikely friendship. Each evening, Tom would finish his work and bring 2 cups of coffee to the cottonwood tree. They would sit on fallen logs and talk as the stars appeared overhead. Ayana told him about her life with her people, how they moved with the seasons and lived close to the land. She spoke of her husband, a warrior named Naichi, who had been gentle with children and made her laugh with his stories. She told him about her sons, one who loved horses and another who could track a rabbit through rocky ground. Tom found himself talking about Sarah and the children too, something he had not been able to do with anyone in town. He told Ayana about Sarah's laugh, how she hummed while she cooked, how she always found 4-leaf clovers when they walked together. He spoke of his daughter Emma, who collected pretty rocks, and his son Daniel, who wanted to be a cowboy like his father. As the weeks passed, their conversations grew longer and more comfortable. Ayana began to help with small tasks around the ranch. She showed Tom how to find medicinal plants in the desert, how to read the signs that predicted weather changes. In return, Tom taught her about cattle and horses, how to repair leather tack and mend broken tools. The people in Cedar Ridge began to notice changes in Tom. He came to town more often for supplies, and when he did, he was cleaner and more talkative than he had been in months. Doc Henderson remarked that Tom looked like a man who was eating regular meals again. The storekeeper's wife mentioned that Tom had bought coffee beans twice in 1 month, which was unusual for a man who usually made his supplies last as long as possible. But Tom and Ayana were careful to keep their friendship secret. She never came to the ranch during daylight hours, and they met only in the evenings when curious eyes were less likely to spot her. Tom knew that some of the ranchers in the area would not hesitate to shoot an Apache on sight, and he lived in constant fear that Ayana might encounter such men while traveling to and from his ranch. One evening in late autumn, as the air grew crisp and the cottonwood leaves turned golden, Ayana did not appear at sunset. Tom waited by the tree until full dark, then walked the perimeter of his property, calling her name softly. The desert answered only with the howl of coyotes and the rustle of wind through dry grass. He waited the next evening, too, and the one after that. Days turned into weeks, and still Ayana did not return. Tom found himself watching the desert constantly, hoping to catch a glimpse of her buckskin dress or hear the soft sound of her footsteps on the sand. The coffee he brewed went cold and untouched. The ranch seemed emptier than it had before she came into his life. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow to the high desert and bitter cold that froze the water troughs solid each morning. Tom threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, cutting firewood until his shoulders ached and mending every piece of equipment on the ranch twice over. But nothing could distract him from the growing certainty that something terrible had happened to Ayana. The people in Cedar Ridge noticed the change in him again. He became even more solitary than before, speaking to no one unless absolutely necessary. His beard grew long and unkempt, and his eyes took on a wild look that made the townspeople cross the street when they saw him coming. Christmas came and went without celebration. Tom had not celebrated the holiday since Sarah's death, but this year the loneliness felt particularly acute. He found himself talking to Ayana as if she was still there, telling her about his day, asking her opinion on which cattle to sell in the spring. He knew he was probably losing his mind, but he did not care. The conversations made him feel less alone. It was on a bitter January morning, when the snow lay 3 feet deep around the ranch house, that Tom heard the sound of horses approaching. He looked out his window to see a group of riders coming up the road from town. There were 5 men, all armed, all wearing the grim expressions of people who had come to deliver bad news or make trouble. Tom recognized the leader as Sheriff Billy Hawkins, a fair man who had always treated Tom with respect. Behind him rode Deputy Martinez, old Frank Donovan from the neighboring ranch, and 2 men Tom did not know but who had the hard look of bounty hunters or hired guns. Tom pulled on his coat and stepped out onto the porch, his rifle in his hands but pointed at the ground. "Morning, Sheriff," he called. "Tom," Hawkins nodded. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About your Apache friend." Tom felt his heart skip a beat, but he kept his face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Frank Donovan spat into the snow. "Don't lie to us, Tom. Half the territory knows you've been harboring a redskin woman. My boys saw her coming and going from your place all through the fall." One of the strangers spoke up, his voice carrying a Texas drawl. "That woman is wanted for questioning in connection with raids on settlements south of here. 3 families killed, their homes burned." "That's impossible," Tom said, his voice harder than he intended. "Ayana wouldn't hurt anyone." Sheriff Hawkins held up a hand to quiet the others. "Tom, I've known you for 5 years. You're a good man who's been through hell and back, but harboring a hostile Apache is a serious crime, especially one who might be involved in killings." "She's not hostile," Tom insisted. "She lost her family just like I lost mine. She's been living peacefully, hasn't bothered anyone." "Where is she now?" asked the Texan. Tom realized he was trapped. If he told them the truth that he had not seen Ayana in months and was desperately worried about her, they might believe she had left to rejoin hostile forces. If he claimed she was still around, they would demand to search his property and might set a trap for her return. "She's gone," he said finally. "Left weeks ago when the weather turned cold." "Which direction?" pressed the deputy. "South towards Mexico, I think." The men exchanged glances. The Texan looked disappointed, as if he had been hoping for a fight. Frank Donovan still looked skeptical, but Sheriff Hawkins seemed to accept Tom's story. "Tom, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt here," Hawkins said. "But if that woman shows up again, you need to turn her in. The territorial governor has put a bounty on any Apache not on the reservation, and feelings are running high after those killings. I can't protect you if folks think you're helping the enemy." After the men rode away, Tom stood on his porch for a long time, staring out at the endless white expanse of desert. Wherever Ayana was, he hoped she was safe and warm. But, deep in his heart, he feared he might never see her again. The winter seemed to stretch on forever after that. Tom's supplies ran low, and he was forced to make more frequent trips to town for food and feed for his animals. Each time he went, he felt the suspicious stares of his neighbors and heard the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. Word had spread about the sheriff's visit, and now everyone in Cedar Ridge knew that Tom McCarty had been keeping company with an Apache woman. Some of the townspeople were merely curious, but others were openly hostile. Tom found himself excluded from conversations, overcharged for supplies, and generally treated as an outcast. He did not much care about the social isolation, but the practical difficulties were becoming serious. If the people in town completely turned against him, he would have no way to get the supplies he needed to keep his ranch running. February brought a brief warm spell that melted much of the snow and gave Tom hope that spring might come early. He spent the warmer days repairing winter damage to his buildings and checking on his cattle, many of whom had wandered far from the ranch house during the worst of the storms. It was during one of these cattle-gathering expeditions that Tom found the first sign that Ayana might still be alive. Hidden in a small canyon about 5 miles from his ranch, he discovered the remains of a temporary camp. There were the ashes of a small fire, carefully scattered to hide the evidence, and a few barely visible moccasin tracks in the mud near a seasonal stream. Tom's heart raced as he examined the tracks. They were small and narrow, the right size for Ayana's feet, but the camp was at least a week old, maybe more, and there was no way to know if she was still in the area or had moved on. He began riding out to the canyon every few days, hoping to find more recent signs of habitation. He left small gifts near the old campsite: coffee beans wrapped in cloth, strips of dried meat, a small metal pot that would be useful for cooking. The gifts always disappeared, but Tom could never be sure if Ayana was taking them or if other travelers were finding his offerings. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Tom found himself caught between hope and despair. Part of him believed that Ayana was still alive and hiding somewhere in the vast desert, waiting for a safe time to make contact. But another part of him feared that the signs he had found belonged to someone else entirely, and that Ayana had met some terrible fate during the long months of her absence. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing she was gone forever. At least with Sarah and the children, he had been able to say goodbye, to bury them properly, and know they were at rest. With Ayana, there was only the endless question of what had happened to her, and whether she would ever return. March brought the first wildflowers to the desert, painting the landscape in brilliant reds and yellows. Tom remembered how Ayana had loved the spring blooms, how she would point out different flowers and tell him their names in her language. The memory was both beautiful and painful, a reminder of all the conversations they might never have again. It was on a warm evening in late March, as Tom sat by the cottonwood tree drinking his solitary coffee and watching the stars appear, that he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching through the darkness. His heart leaped in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still. Too many times over the winter he had imagined hearing her voice or seeing her silhouette, only to discover it was wishful thinking or the play of shadows. But this time was different. The footsteps were real, and they were moving with the careful, quiet gait that he remembered so well. Tom set down his coffee cup and stood slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might cause the vision to disappear. "Tom!" The voice was real, soft and familiar in the darkness. Ayana stepped into the circle of light cast by the lantern he had brought out from the house. She looked thinner than he remembered, and there was something different about her eyes, a wariness that had not been there before. But she was alive, and she was here, and that was all that mattered. "Ayana," he breathed. "I was afraid." "I know," she said simply. "I've been watching you for many days, making sure it was safe to approach. There has been much trouble." Tom wanted to rush to her, to embrace her, and tell her how worried he had been. But something in her posture held him back. She stood at the very edge of the light, poised to flee at the first sign of danger. "I heard about the raids," Tom said. "The sheriff came looking for you. They think you were involved." Ayana's face hardened. "I was not involved, but I know who was. My brother-in-law, Running Wolf, has been leading young warriors in attacks on the white settlements. He believes that only through violence can our people reclaim their land." Where have you been all winter? Hiding in the mountains, trying to stay ahead of both the soldiers and Running Wolf's men. He wants me to join his band, to use my knowledge of the white settlements to help plan attacks. When I refused, he said I was a traitor to our people. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What will you do now? I do not know. I cannot go back to my people while Running Wolf leads them down this path of war. But I cannot stay here either. The white authorities will never believe I am innocent of the raids. They stood in silence for several minutes, both understanding the impossible situation they faced. The friendship that had brought them so much comfort and healing was now a danger to both of them. The world seemed determined to tear apart any connection between people of different races, no matter how innocent or meaningful. There might be another way, Tom said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. But it would be risky, and it would change everything. Ayanna looked at him with curiosity and hope. What do you mean? Tom took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to suggest would shock her and perhaps end their friendship forever. But he had lost too much already to let fear stop him from trying to save what remained. Marry me, he said. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ayanna stared at Tom with wide eyes, her face unreadable in the lantern light. For a moment, the only sound was the distant howl of coyotes and the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves in the night breeze. Marry you? She whispered, as if she could not believe what she had heard. Tom's heart hammered in his chest, but he pressed on. Think about it, Ayanna. As my wife, you would be under the protection of federal law. The territorial authorities couldn't touch you without solid evidence of wrongdoing. And Running Wolf, he might leave you alone if you were clearly committed to a life among the whites. Ayanna shook her head slowly. Tom, you speak of marriage as if it were a business arrangement. Do you understand what you are asking? I understand that I care about you more than I've cared about anyone since Sarah died, Tom said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I understand that these past months without you have been the loneliest of my life. And I understand that if we don't find a way to be together safely, I'll lose you forever, one way or another. The people in your town would never accept an Apache wife. They barely tolerate you now, and that's just for befriending me. Marriage would make you a complete outcast. Tom stepped closer, and this time Ayanna did not retreat. Let them talk. I've been alone for 3 years, Ayanna. Alone, and slowly dying inside. You brought me back to life. I won't lose that again. And what of your wife? Your Sarah? How can you ask another woman to take her place so easily? The question cut deep, but Tom had been thinking about it during the long winter months. I'm not asking you to take Sarah's place. No one could do that. But Sarah is gone, and I'm still here, still living. She would want me to find happiness again. She would want me to help someone I care about. Ayanna turned away, looking out into the darkness beyond the ranch. In my culture, we have ceremonies for the dead. We help their spirits move on to the next world. But we also believe that life is for the living. My husband, Nightshade, before he died, he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would not spend my life in mourning. He said that would dishonor his memory. Then what's holding you back? She was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Fear. Fear that you are making this offer out of pity or desperation. Fear that we come from worlds too different to ever truly understand each other. Fear that our marriage would bring danger to both of us. Tom reached out slowly and took her hand. Her skin was warm and calloused from hard work, just like his own. Ayanna, I won't lie to you. There will be dangers. People will talk. Some will be hostile. It won't be an easy life. But I'm not offering marriage out of pity. I'm offering it because I love you. The words surprised even him. He had not planned to say them, had barely admitted them to himself. But now that they were spoken, he knew they were true. Love had grown slowly between them, built on shared grief and mutual understanding, nurtured by long conversations under the stars. Ayanna looked down at their joined hands, her thumb tracing across his knuckles. You love me, she said, as if testing the words. I do. I love you too, Tom McCarty. I have for months, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself. The confession hung between them like a bridge, spanning the gap that had seemed impossible to cross. Tom felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he had thought was buried forever with Sarah. Then you'll marry me? Ayana squeezed his hand. Yes. God help us both, but yes. They were married 3 days later by Judge William Morrison, a circuit judge who happened to be passing through Cedar Ridge on his way to Tucson. Tom had ridden into town that morning, determined to make the marriage legal and official before anyone could talk him out of it or create obstacles. The ceremony took place in the judge's hotel room, with only the desk clerk and the hotel owner as witnesses. Judge Morrison was a practical man who had seen enough of frontier life to know that unusual circumstances sometimes called for unconventional solutions. He asked no questions about Ayana's background, accepting Tom's explanation that she was a widow who needed the protection that marriage would provide. Ayana wore a simple blue dress that Tom had bought from the general store, along with a pair of black boots that were slightly too large for her feet. Tom had shaved his beard and put on his best shirt, the one he had worn to Sarah's funeral 3 years earlier. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes, but when Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Tom felt as if his life was beginning again. The reaction from the townspeople was immediate and severe. By the time Tom and Ayana walked out of the hotel as a married couple, word had already spread throughout Cedar Ridge. People stopped their conversations to stare at them, their faces showing everything from shock to disgust to outright anger. Mrs. Pub Gopriak Henderson, the doctor's wife, pulled her children away as if Ayana carried some contagious disease. Frank Donovan, who had been part of the posse that had searched for Ayana months earlier, stood on the porch of the saloon with his hands on his hips, glaring at Tom with undisguised hatred. "You've gone too far this time, McCarty," Donovan called out. "Marrying a savage is one thing, but bringing her into decent society is another." Tom felt Ayana tense beside him, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "Mrs. McCarty is my wife, Frank. You'll treat her with respect, or you'll answer to me." "Mrs. McCarty?" Donovan laughed harshly. "That redskin will never be a real wife. She's just your squaw, and everyone knows it." Tom started toward the saloon, his fists clenched, but Ayana caught his arm. "No," she said quietly. "This is not the time for fighting." She was right, of course. Starting a brawl in the middle of town would only make their situation worse. But Tom felt the burning need to defend his wife's honor, to make these people understand that Ayana was not some exotic curiosity or temporary companion. They completed their business in town as quickly as possible, buying supplies and picking up a few personal items that Ayana would need. The storekeeper, George Patterson, was civil but cold, charging them full price for everything and making it clear that their money was welcome, but their presence was not. As they loaded their purchases into Tom's wagon, Sheriff Hawkins approached them. He looked uncomfortable, his hat in his hands, his weathered face creased with worry. "Tom, I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About the situation you've put yourself in. I heard about the wedding. The whole territory will hear about it by next week. Is there a law against a man marrying a woman, Sheriff?" Hawkins shook his head. "No law against it, but that doesn't mean it's wise. Tom, there are folks around here who see this marriage as a betrayal. They think you've sided with the enemy. Ayana isn't the enemy. She's never hurt anyone. Maybe not, but her people have. And right now, with all the trouble brewing between the Apache and the settlers, this looks bad, real bad." Ayana spoke for the first time since they had left the hotel. "Sheriff Hawkins, I understand your concerns, but I am no longer Apache. I am Mrs. McCarty, a citizen of the United States by marriage. I have chosen to live in your world by your laws." Hawkins studied her face carefully. "Ma'am, I hope you mean that, because there are men in this territory who would shoot first and ask questions later if they thought you were a threat." "I understand. And I give you my word that I will never do anything to harm the innocent people of this territory." The sheriff nodded slowly, then turned back to Tom. "You watch yourself out there, Tom. Keep your guns close and your eyes open. And if there's any trouble, any at all, you send word to me immediately." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Tom and Ayana lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting as they pulled up to the ranch house, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. It should have been a beautiful moment, a new bride arriving at her new home. But Tom could feel the tension radiating from Ayana. "Having second thoughts?" he asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "No," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's just this is all so different from what I imagined my life would be." Tom understood. She had spent her childhood and young womanhood living with her tribe, moving with the seasons, following ancient traditions that connected her people to the land and to each other. Now she was expected to live as a white woman, confined to a single place, surrounded by people who saw her as an outsider at best and an enemy at worst. "We'll take it one day at a time," Tom said. "And if it doesn't work out, if you find you can't be happy here, we'll figure out something else." That evening, they sat by the cottonwood tree where their friendship had first blossomed. Ayana had changed back into her buckskin dress, more comfortable in the clothing of her people than in the restrictive garments of white society. Tom made coffee just as he had done so many times before, but now everything was different. They were married, committed to building a life together, but neither of them was quite sure what that life would look like. "Tom," Ayana said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "there are things about my past that you need to know, things that might change how you feel about me. Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "When I was 16, I was captured by Mexican slavers. They took me to a hacienda near Sonora, where I was forced to work in the fields and other things. I was there for 2 years before Nietzsche and his warriors rescued me." Tom felt a surge of anger at the thought of what she must have endured, but he kept his voice gentle. "I'm sorry that happened to you, but it doesn't change anything between us. There's more. During my time with the Mexicans, I learned to speak Spanish fluently. I also learned about their military tactics, their weapon supplies, their trade routes. When I returned to my people, that knowledge was useful." "You helped plan raids against the Mexicans?" "Yes, not against innocent people, but against the men who had enslaved me and others like me, against the soldiers who attacked our camps. I am not as innocent as you might believe, Tom." Tom considered this revelation carefully. The woman he had married was not just a victim of circumstances, but someone who had fought back against her oppressors, someone who had used her knowledge and skills to protect her people. It made him respect her more, not less. "We've all done things to survive, Ayana. I've killed men in battle, back during my time in the cavalry. I've made choices that I'm not proud of. What matters now is what we do from here forward." "And what do we do?" Tom looked out at his ranch, at the cattle grazing in the distance, and the mountains rising like ancient sentinels against the star-filled sky. "We build something together. Something good. Something that honors both of our pasts while creating a future worth living." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine that gradually began to feel natural. Ayana proved to be an invaluable partner in running the ranch. She had a natural way with animals, especially horses, and could spot signs of illness or injury that Tom might miss. Her knowledge of desert plants and weather patterns helped them make better decisions about grazing and water management. She also proved to be an excellent cook, preparing meals that combined traditional Apache ingredients with the staples Tom was used to. She showed him how to prepare various types of cactus, how to make nutritious porridge from mesquite beans, and how to preserve meat using techniques passed down through generations of her people. But the outside world would not leave them alone. Weekly trips to town for supplies became exercises in endurance, as they faced the cold stares and whispered comments of their neighbors. Some of the hostility was simply prejudice, but other reactions seemed to stem from genuine fear. Reports of Apache raids continued to filter in from other parts of the territory. Running Wolf and his band were becoming bolder, attacking supply wagons and isolated homesteads with increasing frequency. Each new attack made life more difficult for Tom and Ayana, as suspicion fell on anyone with Apache connections. One morning in late April, Tom was awakened by the sound of riders approaching the ranch. He grabbed his rifle and peered out the window to see a group of 8 men, all heavily armed and wearing the dusty clothes of travelers who had been riding hard. At their head was a tall man with silver hair and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Tom McCarthy!" the marshal called. "This is Deputy Marshal Cole Washington. I need to speak with you and your wife." Tom glanced at Ayana, who had awakened at the sound of voices. Her face was pale but determined. They had known this moment would come eventually. "We're coming out," Tom called back. "Keep your guns holstered." They stepped onto the porch together, Tom with his rifle in his hands but pointed at the ground, Ayana standing tall and proud beside him. Marshal Washington dismounted and approached, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "McCarty," he said, nodding politely to Ayana. "I'm here on behalf of the territorial governor. There have been charges made against you in connection with recent Apache raids." "What charges?" Tom demanded. conspiracy, providing aid and comfort to hostile Indians, and accessory to murder. There was an attack on a supply train near Wickenburg last week. 7 men killed, including 2 civilians. One of the survivors claims he recognized Mrs. McCarty among the raiders. Ayana's face went white, but her voice was steady. That's impossible. I have not left this ranch in weeks, except to go to town with my husband. Can anyone verify that? Tom stepped forward. I can verify it. She's been with me every day. Marshal Washington looked skeptical. Mr. McCarty, with all due respect, the word of a husband protecting his wife doesn't carry much weight in court. Is there anyone else who can vouch for her whereabouts? The truth was, there wasn't. They had been so isolated from their neighbors that no one else could provide an alibi for Ayana. Tom realized that their self-imposed isolation, which had felt like protection, was now working against them. Marshal, Ayana said, may I see this witness who claims to have recognized me? If he can look me in the eye and swear that I was among those raiders, then I will submit to your authority. Washington considered this for a moment. That can be arranged. But Mrs. McCarty, I'm afraid I'll have to place you under arrest pending trial. You'll be held in the territorial jail in Phoenix. No. Tom's voice was flat and final. You're not taking my wife anywhere based on the word of one man who may have been half dead from fear and wounds. The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut with a knife. McCarty, Washington said carefully, I understand your feelings, but I have my orders. Mrs. McCarty needs to come with me. Then you'll have to go through me to get her. Tom raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone, but making his intentions clear. Behind him, he heard Ayana draw in a sharp breath. Tom, she said quietly, don't do this. It will only make things worse. I won't let them take you. Not based on lies. Marshal Washington held up a hand to his men, who were beginning to look nervous. Mr. McCarty, let's think about this rationally. If your wife is innocent, a trial will prove that. But if you resist arrest, you'll be charged as well. Is that what you want? Tom felt trapped. Every instinct told him to fight, to protect his wife from a justice system that he knew was stacked against her. But Ayana was right. Violence would only make things worse, turning them into fugitives with no hope of proving her innocence. I'll come with you willingly, Ayana said, placing a gentle hand on Tom's arm. But I want my husband present when I face this witness. I want him there during the trial. That can be arranged, Washington agreed. Mr. McCarty, you can accompany us to Phoenix. Your wife will be treated fairly. I give you my word. Tom looked into Ayana's eyes and saw strength there, along with fear. She was asking him to trust the system that had already failed both of them so many times. But she was also asking him to trust her, to believe that her innocence would be enough to save her. All right, Tom said finally, lowering his rifle. But if any harm comes to her, Marshal, you'll answer to me. An hour later, they were riding toward Phoenix. Ayana on horseback with her hands bound, Tom riding beside her, and 8 armed men surrounding them. As they crested the hill that overlooked Tom's ranch, Ayana turned back to look at the place that had been their home for such a short time. We'll be back, Tom promised her. Whatever it takes, we'll be back. But even as he spoke the words, Tom wondered if he would ever see his ranch again. The world seemed determined to tear them apart, and he was beginning to fear that love alone might not be enough to keep them together. The journey to Phoenix took 3 days, and with each mile they traveled, Tom felt his hope diminishing. The witness against Ayana was a supply train guard named Pete Morrison, a man with a reputation for honesty and sharp eyes. If he was willing to swear in court that he had seen Ayana among the raiders, it would be difficult to convince a jury otherwise. On the evening of the 2nd day, as they made camp beside a small stream, Marshal Washington sat down next to Tom by the fire. The other men were tending to the horses or preparing their bedrolls, leaving the 2 men relatively alone. Mr. McCarty, Washington said quietly, I want you to know that I don't take any pleasure in this situation. Your wife seems like a decent woman, and you clearly care about her. But I have a job to do. I understand that, Marshal. But you need to understand that if Ayana is convicted of something she didn't do, there will be consequences. Is that a threat? Tom shook his head. It's a statement of fact. There are forces at work here bigger than just one false accusation. If the territorial government executes an innocent woman because she's Apache, it will only fuel more violence. Men like Running Wolf will use her death as justification for escalating their raids. Washington poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. You may be right. But what would you have me do? Ignore a sworn statement from a credible witness? Investigate thoroughly. Don't just assume that because someone says they saw an Apache woman, it must have been my wife. There are other Apache women in the territory, including some who might actually be involved with the raiders. Such as? Tom hesitated, not wanting to implicate innocent people, but desperate to save Ayana. Running Wolf has followers. Some of them are women who have lost family members to white violence. They might be angry enough to participate in raids. Do you know any names? No, but Ayana might. She knows the people in Running Wolf's band. Washington looked toward where Ayana sat by the stream, her legs bound to prevent escape. Would she be willing to provide information about other suspects? If it would save innocent lives, yes, but Marshall. She would never betray people who are simply trying to defend their families. You need to understand the difference. The Marshal nodded thoughtfully. I'll keep that in mind when we question her. That night, Tom lay awake staring at the stars and thinking about how quickly his life had changed. Just weeks ago, he had been a happily married man starting a new life with the woman he loved. Now he was traveling to a territorial capital where that same woman might be tried and executed for crimes she had not committed. He thought about Sarah and the children, wondering what they would think of the choices he had made. Would Sarah understand his love for Ayana? Would she approve of his decision to marry again? He liked to think she would, but in the dark hours before dawn, doubt crept into his mind like cold fog. On the third day, they reached Phoenix, a bustling territorial capital that seemed enormous compared to the small towns Tom was used to. The streets were crowded with wagons, horsemen, and pedestrians going about their business. The sight of a bound Apache woman being escorted by a marshal's posse drew curious stares and angry mutters from the crowd. Ayana was taken directly to the territorial jail, a stone building that looked more like a fortress than a place of justice. Tom was allowed to accompany her as far as the booking area, where a bored-looking clerk recorded her name and the charges against her. When will the trial begin? Tom asked Marshal Washington. Judge Parker will be here next week. Until then, Mrs. McCarty will be held in protective custody. Protective custody? Mr. McCarty, there are people in this city who would like to see your wife dead without the benefit of a trial. Keeping her in jail is as much for her protection as it is to prevent escape. Tom understood the logic, but it didn't make him feel any better about watching his wife being led away to a jail cell. As the iron door clanged shut behind her, he felt as if part of his soul was being locked away as well. I'll be back tomorrow, he called through the bars. I know, she replied, her voice strong despite everything. And Tom, find out everything you can about this witness. Our lives may depend on it. Tom spent the night in a cheap hotel near the jail, unable to sleep for worry about Ayana. In the morning, he began his investigation into Pete Morrison, the witness who claimed to have seen his wife among the raiders. What he discovered over the next few days would change everything. Morrison was indeed considered an honest man, but Tom learned that he had suffered a serious head wound during the attack on the supply train. The local doctor who had treated him admitted that Morrison had been unconscious for several hours and confused for days afterward. His memory of the attack was fragmentary at best. More importantly, Tom discovered that Morrison had never actually spoken to Ayana face-to-face. His identification was based on a brief glimpse of a woman with dark braids wearing buckskin clothing. In the chaos of battle, with smoke and dust everywhere, it would have been easy to mistake one Apache woman for another. Tom also learned something else that chilled him to the bone. Running Wolf's band had indeed included women in the recent raids, including a woman named Desba who was roughly the same height and build as Ayana. Desba had lost her entire family in a cavalry attack 2 years earlier and had become one of Running Wolf's most vicious followers. Armed with this information, Tom requested a meeting with the prosecutor, a thin man named Colonel James Whitman, who served as the Territorial Attorney General. Whitman agreed to see Tom in his office, a cramped room above the courthouse that reeked of tobacco smoke and old paper. Mr. McCarty, Whitman said, not bothering to rise from his desk, I understand you wish to discuss your wife's case. Yes, sir. I have information that proves she's innocent. Whitman leaned back in his chair and studied Tom with cold eyes. McCarty, I'll be frank with you. Your wife is Apache. There have been Apache raids. The mathematics are simple. The mathematics are wrong, Tom replied, his anger rising. Pete Morrison was seriously injured during the attack. His memory is unreliable. And there are other Apache women who actually were involved in the raids, such as a woman named Desba. She rides with Running Wolf's band and matches my wife's description. Whitman made a note on a piece of paper. Interesting. Do you have any proof of this Desba's involvement? Not yet, but if you'll give me time to investigate, Mr. McCarty, I don't have time for wild theories. The territorial governor wants this matter resolved quickly. Your wife will stand trial next week, and unless you can produce this Desba woman or some other compelling evidence, she will likely be convicted. Tom felt desperation creeping into his voice. Colonel, if you execute an innocent woman, it will only make the Apache situation worse. Running Wolf will use her death as justification for more raids. That may be true, but it's not my concern. My job is to prosecute crimes, not to worry about political consequences. Tom left the meeting feeling more hopeless than ever. He had 6 days to prove Ayana's innocence, and he was no closer to finding the real culprits than when he had started. That evening, as he sat in the jail visiting room talking to Ayana through the iron bars, he shared his frustration. I know you're trying, Tom, she said, reaching through the bars to touch his hand, but perhaps it's time to accept that this is how our story ends. No, Tom's voice was fierce. I won't accept that. There has to be something we're missing. Ayana was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Tom, there is something I haven't told you. Something that might help, but it could also put other people in danger. What is it? I know where Running Wolf's band is hiding. I know because my cousin, Yellowbird, left me a message at our old meeting place near your ranch. She wants to meet with me, to try to convince me to join them before it's too late. Tom felt his heart leap. If we could get to Yellowbird, maybe she could testify that you weren't with the raiders. Or maybe she could tell us where Desba is. Ayana added. But Tom, getting to them would mean breaking me out of jail. It would make us both fugitives. Tom considered the options. None of them good. If he helped Ayana escape, they would be hunted for the rest of their lives. But if he did nothing, she would almost certainly be convicted and executed. How would we do it? He asked. You would need help and luck and a plan that doesn't get you killed in the process. That night, Tom lay awake in his hotel room, wrestling with an impossible decision. I'm mourning. He had made up his mind. If the law would not protect his innocent wife, then he would have to take matters into his own hands. The next day, Tom began making careful preparations. He bought supplies for a long journey into the desert, including extra water, ammunition, and medical supplies. He also sent a telegram to Doc Henderson back in Cedar Ridge, asking him to look after Tom's ranch in case he didn't return. His plan was simple but dangerous. On the night before Ayana's trial was set to begin, he would break her out of jail and they would ride into the desert to find Running Wolf's band. It was their only chance to prove her innocence and perhaps prevent a wider war. But Tom's plans were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. On the afternoon of the 5th day, Sheriff Hawkins arrived in Phoenix with urgent news. Tom, he said, finding him in the hotel dining room. You need to hear this. There's been another raid this morning, about 50 miles north of Cedar Ridge. But this time, we got lucky. What do you mean? We caught one of them, a young Apache brave who was wounded and couldn't keep up with the others. He's talking, Tom, singing like a bird. Tom's heart raced. What's he saying? He's given us the names of everyone in Running Wolf's band, including the women. And Tom, your wife's name isn't on the list? Relief flooded through Tom like a warm river. What about Desba? She's on the list. The brave described her perfectly, right down to the scar on her left cheek from a cavalry saber. Pete Morrison must have seen her during the supply train attack. Not your wife. Tom wanted to cheer, but he forced himself to remain calm. Will this Apache brave testify at Ayana's trial? Sheriff Hawkins nodded. He's already agreed to it. Seems he's tired of running and killing. Wants to make peace with the authorities. What's his name? He calls himself Joseph now. Says he was converted by a missionary a few years back. Real name is something I can't pronounce, but he speaks good English. That evening, Tom visited Ayana with the best news he had ever delivered. When he told her about Joseph's testimony, she broke down and wept, the first time he had seen her cry since her arrest. I was so afraid, she whispered. Not of dying, but of leaving you alone again. You're not going anywhere, Tom assured her. We're going to go home, and we're going to build the life we planned. The trial began the next morning in a packed courtroom. The territorial judge, a stern man named Parker, listened carefully as the prosecutor presented his case. Pete Morrison testified about what he remembered from the raid, but under cross-examination by Ayana's court-appointed lawyer, it became clear that his memory was unreliable. Then Joseph took the stand. He was a small man with intelligent eyes and hands that shook slightly as he swore to tell the truth. Speaking in careful English, he described the structure of Running Wolf's band and named each member who had participated in raids over the past year. Was the defendant, Mrs. McCarty, ever part of your band? The defense lawyer asked. No, sir. I never saw this woman before today. What about a woman named Desba? Yes, sir. Desba is Running Wolf's war leader. She has been with us for 2 seasons. She has a scar here, he touched his left cheek, from fighting soldiers. Could someone who saw Desba from a distance mistake her for Mrs. McCarty? Joseph looked carefully at Ayana, then nodded. They are similar height, similar build. In battle, with dust and smoke, yes, it would be easy to confuse them. The prosecutor tried to discredit Joseph's testimony, suggesting that he was lying to save a fellow Apache. But Joseph remained calm and consistent in his answers, and his details about the raids matched what the authorities already knew. Judge Parker called a recess to consider the evidence. When court reconvened an hour later, his verdict was swift and decisive. Based on the testimony presented, I find that there is reasonable doubt about Mrs. McCarty's involvement in the alleged crimes. The charges are dismissed. Mrs. Dillahad, McCarty, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and angry shouts. Some people were pleased to see justice done, but others clearly felt that Ayana was escaping punishment simply because she was married to a white man. Tom pushed through the crowd to embrace his wife, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from his chest. They had survived the trial, but he knew their troubles were far from over. Outside the courthouse, Marshal Washington approached them with a serious expression. Mrs. McCarty, you're free to go, but I want to give you some advice. There are people in this territory who won't accept the court's verdict. You and your husband need to be very careful. We understand, Marshal, Ayana replied. Thank you for treating us fairly. As they prepared to leave Phoenix, Tom and Ayana were approached by Joseph, the Apache brave whose testimony had saved her life. He looked nervous, glancing around as if he expected to be attacked at any moment. Mrs. McCarty, he said quietly, I have a message for you from Yellowbird. Ayana's eyes widened. What message? She says that Running Wolf is planning something big, something that will bring war to the whole territory. She wants you to know that not all of our people support his path. What is he planning? Joseph shook his head. I do not know the details, but Yellowbird says it will happen soon, and many innocent people will die on both sides. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Just when they thought their troubles were over, a new and potentially greater danger was emerging. Thank you for telling us, Ayana said. And Joseph, thank you for speaking the truth in court. You saved my life. I am tired of the killing, Joseph replied. I want to find a better way for our peoples to live together. The journey back to Cedar Ridge took 4 days, and Tom and Ayana used the time to talk about their future. They both knew that their marriage would continue to face challenges, but they also knew that their love had been tested and had survived. Tom, Ayana said as they crested the last hill before their ranch came into view, I want you to know that I choose this life with you freely, not because I have no other options, but because this is where I want to be. Even after everything we've been through, especially after everything we've been through, we faced the worst that the world could throw at us, and we're still here, still together. As they rode up to their ranch house, Tom felt a sense of coming home that he had never expected to feel again. The buildings looked exactly as they had when they left, but somehow everything seemed different. This was no longer just Tom's ranch where Ayana happened to live. This was their home, built on love and strengthened by adversity. That evening, they sat by the cottonwood tree where their relationship had first begun. The stars were brilliant in the desert sky, and the night air was warm with the promise of summer. What happens now? Tom asked. Now we live our lives, Ayana replied. We work the ranch, we help our neighbors when we can, and we try to build bridges between our peoples. And if Running Wolf carries out his plans, if there's another war? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Then we'll face it together. But Tom, I have an idea. Something that might help prevent the war that Joseph warned us about. What kind of idea? Yellow Bird wants to meet with me. She's part of Running Wolf's band, but she doesn't agree with his methods. Maybe if I could talk to her, I could learn more about what he's planning. Maybe I could even convince some of his followers to choose a different path. Tom felt his stomach tighten with fear. That would be incredibly dangerous. If Running Wolf found out you were trying to undermine his plans, he would kill me, yes. But Tom, how many people will die if his war begins? How many families will lose everything the way we both did? Tom understood what she was asking, and it terrified him. She wanted to risk her life to prevent a larger tragedy. She wanted to use her knowledge of Apache culture and her connections to Running Wolf's people to work for peace. I can't lose you again, Tom said. We just got our life back. You won't lose me, but I can't sit here safely while other people suffer and die. It's not who I am. Tom looked at his wife, seeing the strength and determination that had first attracted him to her. She was not asking for his permission, he realized. She was telling him what she had to do and hoping he would understand. If you're going to do this, he said finally, then we do it together. I won't let you face Running Wolf alone. Ayana shook her head. Tom, a white man riding into an Apache camp would be killed on sight. This is something I have to do myself. Then I'll wait nearby. Close enough to help if things go wrong. They spent the next several days making careful plans. Yellowbird had left a message at a sacred spring about 10 miles from the ranch, suggesting a meeting place deep in the mountains where Running Wolf's band was unlikely to patrol. The meeting would take place in 1 week, during the new moon when darkness would provide cover. As the day approached, Tom found himself torn between admiration for his wife's courage and terror at the thought of losing her. He had already buried one wife, and he did not think he could survive burying another. On the morning of the planned meeting, Ayana dressed in her traditional Apache clothing and prepared for the journey. She carried no weapons except a small knife, hoping that her peaceful intentions would be clear to anyone who saw her. Promise me you'll be careful, Tom said as he helped her mount her horse. I promise. And Tom, if something happens to me, I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. Nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to grow old together on this ranch. And someday we'll tell our grandchildren about all the adventures we had. Ayana smiled, but Tom could see the worry in her eyes. She knew, as he did, that they were walking into unknown danger. The meeting place was a hidden canyon where a small waterfall created a natural gathering spot. Tom positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the canyon, close enough to see what happened, but far enough away to avoid detection. He watched through his field glasses as Ayana rode down into the canyon and dismounted by the water. She waited for over an hour before Yellowbird appeared, emerging from the rocks like a ghost. The two women embraced, and Tom could see them talking earnestly, though he could not hear their words. Their conversation lasted for nearly 2 hours. At one point, Yellowbird became agitated, gesturing wildly and pointing toward the north. Ayana remained calm, speaking in soothing tones and occasionally placing a hand on Yellowbird's shoulder. Finally, Yellowbird nodded and handed Ayana something small, possibly a piece of paper or a token of some kind. The two women embraced again, and Yellowbird disappeared back into the rocks. Ayana rode back to where Tom was waiting, her face grim with the weight of what she had learned. What did she tell you? Tom asked. Running Wolf is planning to attack the railroad station at Flagstaff next week. He believes that if he can disrupt the supply lines, it will force the army to negotiate. Tom felt his blood run cold. How many people will be there? Yellowbird says there could be 50 or 60 civilians at the station, plus railroad workers and possibly army guards. Running Wolf doesn't care about civilian casualties. He sees them as acceptable losses. Did Yellowbird give you any details about the attack? Ayana nodded and handed him a small piece of bark with symbols scratched into it. She drew me a map showing their planned route and the timing of the attack. She wants to save innocent lives, but she's afraid to openly defy Running Wolf. Tom studied the map, his mind racing. They had information that could save dozens of lives, but using it would put them both in danger. The army would want to know how they had obtained such detailed intelligence, and their connection to Running Wolf's band would raise suspicions. We have to warn the authorities, Tom said. I know. but we have to be careful about how we do it. They rode hard back to the ranch, where Tom immediately wrote a letter to Marshal Washington, describing the planned attack, but being vague about how they had learned of it. He sent the letter by fast courier, then waited anxiously for a response. The response came 2 days later in the form of Washington himself, accompanied by a full company of cavalry. The marshal arrived at the ranch looking both grateful and suspicious. "Mr. McCarty, your warning allowed us to set a trap for the raiders. We captured Running Wolf and most of his band without firing a shot. But I need to know how you came by this information." Tom glanced at Aina, who nodded slightly. They had agreed to tell a version of the truth that would protect Yellowbird. "My wife has connections among the Apache people," Tom said. "Someone who wanted to prevent unnecessary bloodshed passed word to her about the attack. And this someone, are they still with Running Wolf's band?" "No," Ayana said firmly. "They left the band weeks ago and have been trying to find a peaceful way to live." Washington studied her face carefully, then nodded. "Well, whoever it was, they saved a lot of lives. Running Wolf was planning to kill everyone at the station, not just disrupt the railroad." "What will happen to Running Wolf now?" Ayana asked. "He'll stand trial for murder and conspiracy. If convicted, he'll probably hang. As for his followers, that depends on their individual involvement in the raids." After Washington and his men left, Tom and Ayana sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The immediate crisis had passed, but they both knew that larger challenges lay ahead. "Do you think this will end the violence?" Tom asked. "Not all of it," Ayana replied. "There are other leaders, other angry young men who want to fight. But maybe it will give the peacemakers a chance to be heard." "And Yellowbird?" She made it to the reservation safely. Washington's letter said she's been working with the Indian agent there, helping other refugees adjust to their new life. Tom took his wife's hand, marveling at how much their lives had changed since that first evening when she had appeared by the cottonwood tree. They had survived loss, prejudice, false accusations, and the threat of war. Their love had been tested by forces beyond their control and had emerged stronger. "I love you, Mrs. McCarty," he said. "And I love you, Mr. McCarty, forever and always." As the stars appeared overhead, they talked about their plans for the future. They would expand the ranch, perhaps hire some of the Apache refugees who needed work. They would continue to build bridges between their communities, showing by example that people of different backgrounds could live together in peace and harmony. It would not be an easy path. Prejudice and misunderstanding would continue to challenge them. But they had learned that love, combined with courage and determination, could overcome even the greatest obstacles. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and Ayana smiled. In Apache tradition, the coyote was a trickster but also a survivor, someone who found ways to thrive in hostile environments. It seemed like an appropriate symbol for their own journey. "What are you thinking about?" Tom asked. "About second chances," she replied. "About how sometimes the most broken people can create something beautiful together. We did that, didn't we?" "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. The desert around them was vast and sometimes harsh, but it was also beautiful and full of life for those who knew how to look for it. After 6 months of separation, uncertainty, and danger, the Apache woman had indeed returned to the ranch by the cottonwood tree. But she had come back as something more than she had been before. She had returned as Tom McCarty's wife, his partner, his equal. She had taken him as her own, just as surely as he had taken her as his, and together they would face whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that their love was strong enough to weather any storm.